Well, hello everybody, Mike Prevost from MikePrevost.com here. And today I want to talk about complete, incomplete, and complementary proteins. And specifically I want to dispel an old myth. And that old myth is that you have to eat either complete or complementary proteins at every meal, or else you compromise protein synthesis. And that's just not true. So in this very short lecture, we're going to explain why that's the case. So let's start with a very brief discussion of protein synthesis. So proteins are made of amino acids. There's a bunch of amino acids, total 21 in all. And proteins are composed of just long chains of these amino acids in a very specific sequence. So we've got a sample protein here in the box. And this protein is composed of methionine, isoleucine, valine, tryptophan, serine, and leucine. And each of those amino acids has to occur in a very specific sequence in order to produce that very specific protein. Now, of those amino acids that comprise proteins, there are 9 of them that are essential. And what we mean by essential is your body can't make those amino acids, so it's essential that you consume them in food. So these 9 essential amino acids have to be consumed in order to make proteins. So what happens if we have an amino acid missing? So let's say we're trying to make that protein in the box there. And we start adding amino acids to the chain, one at a time. And we get to the point where we need this amino acid leucine. But if leucine's not available, and we look here and we see that leucine's an essential amino acid, so the body can't make it. If it's not available, well, this protein can't be finished. And so we can't make this protein if we have one of our essential amino acids not available. And so that's really the reason or the theory behind that old myth that you have to have a complete source of protein with each meal, and if you don't, you may have a missing amino acids and you may compromise protein synthesis. And that's led especially weightlifters and bodybuilders, people trying to increase muscle hypertrophy or muscle growth, to be very concerned about consuming complete sources of protein with each meal. So let's discuss that a little bit further. Well, real simply, a complete protein is a protein that contains all 9 essential amino acids, and it contains them in concentrations and ratios that can support protein synthesis. If it has all 9, but it has just a tiny little bit of, say, leucine, well, it's not going to be enough really to support protein synthesis. So it has to have all 9 and have it in enough concentration and ratio to support protein synthesis. And that's a complete protein. Animal sources like meats and eggs and milk, dairy, those are all very complete proteins. Well, incomplete proteins do not contain all 9 amino acids in concentrations or ratios that can support protein synthesis. They may be missing 1 or more essential amino acids, or they may have very low concentrations of certain essential amino acids. So by themselves, they couldn't support protein synthesis. Well, there's another concept. We can take 2 incomplete proteins and we can mix them to make a complete protein. So let's say we have one protein source that's low in, say, leucine, but has plenty of isoleucine. And we have another protein source that's low in isoleucine, but has plenty of leucine. If we put them together, we have a complete protein, and that's called a complementary protein. And by mixing 2 complementary protein sources together, we can make a complete protein source. There's lots of examples. So real common examples are beans and rice, and peanut butter and whole wheat bread are 2 common examples of complementary proteins. And so that's led bodybuilders in particular to strive to always eat either a complete protein or complementary protein sources. And really, those who are consuming animal products, it's pretty easy to eat complete proteins because most animal foods are a complete protein source by themselves. It's a little bit more challenging for vegans, and so vegan bodybuilders typically focus on complementary protein sources. Again, this has led to the idea that at every meal you need to make sure that you're either getting a complete or a complementary protein source. And I'll explain next why that's not necessarily true. So let's discuss a concept called the amino acid pool. And the amino acid pool is just a pool of amino acids in the body that's available for protein synthesis. So these amino acids are in the bloodstream being carried and also inside of cells, primarily inside of cells. And they're available to be pulled into proteins and protein synthesis. There's always a pool available. So let's talk about what contributes to the amino acid pool. So, typical consumption of protein is about 90 grams. So there's 90 grams of amino acids from what you eat being pushed into the amino acid pool. Now we also have the degradation of body tissues. So body tissues are always being turned over. So there's always breakdown and rebuilding occurring. So when our body tissue degradation contributes about 250 grams to the amino acid pool. So we put those two together and we have about 340 grams of amino acids being pushed into the amino acid pool, some from what we ingest and some from degradation. Now, if we're in nitrogen balance and our body's relatively stable, we also have 250 grams of synthesis, which is pulling 250 grams of amino acids out of the amino acid pool and put it into body tissues. And this just balances degradation over here. And we also have 90 grams of excretion, through feces and urine primarily, which balances our ingested amino acids. So you can see that, what's coming in is matched by what's going out, and that's called nitrogen balance. But there's a recycling, the new amino acids are coming in from degradation and ingestion. So let's do a little bit of math here, and this is kind of interesting. So our amino acid pool, our total amino acid pool, well, what is it comprised of? Well, there's 90 grams of ingested amino acids, right? Plus our 250 grams from degradation. That gives us 340 grams of amino acids in our amino acid pool. Now, what percentage of that amino acid pool is made up of our ingested amino acids throughout the course of the day? Well, we ingest 90. So 90 grams over 340 grams, that gives us about 26%. So think about this for a minute. The amino acid pool that's available to contribute all those essential amino acids that are necessary to synthesize proteins, really only 26% of it is comprised by the foods that we ate that day. And so, even if you ate only incomplete proteins that day, you have a large amount of amino acids in the amino acid pool coming directly from the body itself, from degradation of body tissues that are likely to be able to supply all of the essential amino acids you need. And so for that reason, you don't necessarily have to get all of the essential amino acids in every meal. Now, eventually, if you're missing a particular amino acid or some amino acids consistently, over a longer period of time, you're going to have some problems with protein synthesis. But the general rule now is that as long as you have complementary amino acid sources within about a 48-hour period, then that's just fine. So you don't have to have those complementary sources at each meal. And the reason why is because we have this amino acid pool which buffers shortages in essential amino acids. Well, that's all for today, folks. It was a short one, but an important concept, and hopefully that alleviated a little bit of concern and maybe made your dietary planning a little bit simpler, especially for vegans. As always, if you have questions, head over to my site and submit a comment or shoot me an email. And anyway, I hope you found the lecture today interesting and you learned a little bit. As always, thanks for listening.